Alright, as promised, I am back. This is, as you can see from the title of the video, the top 10 quarterbacks in my opinion of the upcoming season. Not necessarily based on how they did last season or any of the previous seasons, but more on how their team or how good their teams are this year and how well I think they're going to do this season. So let's start off. Number 10, I put Vince Young on the list. A lot of people wouldn't put Vince Young on their list, but the Titans do have the best running back in the league. Vince, in my opinion, has improved a lot on his running, not on his running ability, but his passing ability to go along with his running ability. He is probably more mobile than any other starting NFL quarterback, so that always is an advantage for him. And I can just picture him having a breakout season. I know he got benched a couple seasons back, but I think he's past that now, and I think he's past all those internal problems that he was having. And the Titans have a good offensive unit, so I can see them doing good. Moving on to number 9, I put Matt Ryan on the list. Matt Ryan had a pretty disappointing sophomore season after a really good rookie season, but I could see him breaking out once again this year. And probably not taking the Falcons to the playoffs, but at least keeping them in the playoff hunt and in the playoff race. The Falcons have some pretty decent offensive weapons, so it's not just Matt Ryan all out there by himself, so I think he'll step up. And I think their defense will let them down more than anything this year, more than their offense. So, Matt Ryan, number 9. Moving on to number 8, I threw Eli Manning on the list. Eli, to me, has always had top 10 potential as far as quarterbacks are concerned. Obviously, he's never been as good as his brother, but he did take the Giants to the Super Bowl a couple years ago and beat an undefeated Patriots team. You got to look at the fact, too, that they do have a bunch of offensive weapons. They've even added more offensive weapons this offseason. And Eli is pretty consistent season through season. You know, he's not great, but I'd slot him in at number 8. Moving on to the comeback kid, I put Brett Favre, number 7, on my list. The Vikings have a great team. They will definitely make the playoffs. How much of that due to the fact that Brett Favre is on their team, I don't know. But he is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He really hasn't dropped off productivity-wise too much in the last couple of seasons, so you got to keep him on the list. If people would argue why I wouldn't have him higher on the list, he is 41, and he does play for a really good team. I think there's a lot of NFL quarterbacks that could quarterback the Vikings and take them to the playoffs. But he is still one of the greatest, and he still does have a lot of good, a lot of good potential, and a lot of good ability. So, moving on to number 6, I put Donovan McNabb on the list. Donovan moving from the Eagles to the Redskins. I actually expect him to have a really good season this year. The Redskins have probably just as many offensive weapons as the Eagles had, if not more. So I could really picture not Donovan breaking out this season because he's had a lot of other good seasons before, but I could picture him not getting injured this season, sticking with it, getting the Redskins to the playoffs, and, you know, maybe even having a deep playoff run. So we'll see what happens. Number 5 is somebody that I moved up a lot on the list. Somebody I might not even have on the list normally, but it's Carson Palmer. One of the main reasons he's on the list this year is because of the addition of Terrell Owens in the offseason. A lot of people would say Terrell Owens is done, but in my opinion, Terrell Owens is just somebody that plays when he wants to play. And last year, he didn't play at all. He didn't play for the Bills because he knew the Bills weren't going to make the playoffs. Everybody knew the Bills weren't going to make the playoffs, so I expect Terrell Owens not to have a good season, but a decent enough season, and Chad Ochocinco will have a pretty good season. So with the offensive weapons, and with the fact that Carson Palmer is a really consistent quarterback, other than maybe that 1 year that he got injured, I slotted him up at number 5. My number 4 quarterback is actually possibly one of the greatest quarterbacks of our eras, Tom Brady. I had to drop him to 4 this year just because the Patriots have been really down in the last couple seasons. Their offensive unit really isn't anything that it used to be a couple seasons ago when they went undefeated. Wes Walker coming off that injury, and that's Tom Brady's most consistent or most liked wide receiver, so I don't know how well he's going to do with Wes Walker coming off an injury. Randy Moss is getting up there in age. Tom Brady's still in his prime, so I would say he'll have an alright, decent season, but I don't really see the Patriots making the playoffs. So, Tom Brady, number 4. Number 3 is a quarterback that has really moved up in the last couple seasons and really in this preseason, if you've watched any preseason football, and that's Aaron Rodgers. You can make an argument of Aaron Rodgers being the number 1 overall quarterback. I've seen a lot of fantasy ratings having him number 1 overall, being drafted in fantasy drafts, but I would have to drop him to number 3, just because he needs to prove himself this season. He needs to get the Packers to the playoffs, which he failed to do last season. I think the Packers will make the playoffs this year, and they'll make it pretty easily. He has a lot of good offensive weapons around him. So yeah, I see Aaron Rodgers doing pretty well. Number 2, I threw Drew Brees up at number 2 for obvious reasons. Super Bowl champion, one of the best quarterbacks in the league right now, arguably if not the best quarterback in the league right now. As far as offensive weapons around him is concerned, he's probably got the most offensive weapons around him. So I think a pretty obvious one at Drew Brees. Number 2. And number 1, maybe even a more obvious one, maybe even the greatest quarterback of all time, Peyton Manning. For obvious reasons, slots in at number 1. He really doesn't even have that many great offensive weapons around him other than Reggie Wayne, but he simply is probably the greatest football player that we are watching play at the moment. So you got to put him at number 1. I could really see the Colts winning the Super Bowl this year too, just because how it all happened last year and how it all worked out. I think Peyton's going to be really determined, more determined than in any other season. So let's see what happens. Leave your comments. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you disagree with me. Tell me if you agree with me. Later.